Well, South Africans have been hit hard this festive season with steep increases in the price of tomatoes and potatoes. There's also a frightening fuel price hike that we've seen recently, which are now paying up to 20 Rand a litre. Consumers will now have to dig even much deeper into their pockets in the new year because the price of poultry, chicken, may increase in the new year. That's according to the CEO of the Road Freight Association, Gavin Kelly. And this is due apparently to the cost of transport that is currently under severe pressure. That's on the back of the unrest that we saw in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng in July, and recently that blockade of the N3 highway by protesting truck drivers who said they've got an issue with the employment of foreigners in the industry. Let's speak now to Gavin Kelly. Gavin, a very good evening to you. Welcome to News at Prime. And it's not just the cost of chicken that could go up in the new year, is it?
Good evening, Tim. Good evening to all your viewers. Bad news is no, it isn't just the cost of chicken. It's going to be any consumer product that is transported along the road by a truck. And that's for a number of reasons, and you've mentioned a couple of them. One of them that the rand has tanked, unfortunately, during the course of the year. Price of oil has risen quite sharply. And then we have a lot of consumers or investor loss in confidence. So there's being risk priced into the market. So we're going to be looking at price increases across everything that moves by road.
Any telling yet, Gavin, how steep the prices are likely to be?
I think it's a very difficult one. Obviously, supply and demand comes into play quite often. So you would have seen there were reports in about July, August, just after those riots in KZN, when there were some shortages in terms of some food, in terms of some necessities, where those prices rose quite steeply. There was a bit of price fixing that was investigated and some of those persons were dealt with. But as soon as you have demand outstripping supply, you will always have a price increase. Hopefully, we're not going to see anything more than what is currently in terms of CPI-X, so we shouldn't have anything more than about 4 to 5%, but it's very difficult because each commodity might have a different demand and then, of course, could have its own increase.
The rand-dollar exchange rate perhaps more difficult to predict as far as its movements in the new year, but we're now 6 months away from the chaos of July that saw the N3 highway blocked, a major artery for the transportation of goods in this country, also because of the port in Durban. Do we expect the effects to be felt for much of 2022 or just in the interim?
I think that's just going to be in the interim. If the government can really show that it sticks to its guns in terms of two things, and the first thing is to react proactively, and we've seen that happen now before the Christmas break. There was very, very clear signs of the government taking a hard line. They had put out the army in a number of areas, especially along the N3, and the police have really, really been brought into readiness. So that's the first sign that they're not going to take any nonsense. And then secondly, we're seeing that once again, there's been some movement in terms of dealing with those who were behind a lot of this unrest. We'd obviously like to see a lot more than what is being done, but that's an important pointer. So I think in the interim, there's going to be jitters and there's going to be risk priced into a lot of transport, but hopefully by about February, March, this should be over. And then it could just be the normal types of risk that we have.
Let's talk about abnormal types of risks just for a while longer, because the pandemic has also played a role. During the stricter lockdowns level, I think it was 3, 4, and 5, there was a lack of movement, restrictions, shall we say, on the bulk movement of a lot of products. Some businesses in the transport industry have shut down. Are those lost for good?
Yeah, sometimes you have to ask the question, is it like a tree falling in a forest? So when it was a big multinational, even listed on the stock exchange type of company, we all heard about them. But a lot of little operations and even some medium-sized operations did disappear because they just could not operate. They did not have the revenues coming in. Obviously, a lot of goods were prohibited from moving. And if you weren't into the essentials like medicines or foodstuffs or those things required to bring medicines and the various health types of protocol type of equipment, then you were stuck. So there were a number who did close. It has hurt small SMMEs and small micros quite a lot. So we're going to see some gaps, and there have been reports that in some cases finding smaller operators, smaller guys to do those loads is a little bit difficult at the moment.
And the In South Africa, I'll go back to the conversation around poultry, right? Because in the last decade or so, there's been a lot of debate about dumping chicken that comes from abroad and is sold here at cheap prices. Does the freight industry benefit at all from that? Do you move it?
Not really. Look, we do move it, but of course, a kilometre is a kilometre, and the price of a litre of diesel remains the same. They dump cheap diesel along with the cheap chicken, unfortunately, for us as consumers. So no, that would stay the same. The only difference is that it wouldn't be moved from a chicken farm somewhere in South Africa. It would be moved, I suppose, in a refrigerated container from a port directly to distribution centres. There might be one or two legs less. That would influence the price of chicken. And, one of the things we need to be mindful for is that the price of chicken, and we want to talk chicken in this case, but whatever we grow has a couple of legs between actually coming from where it's grown, where it's produced, to where it is packaged, etc., etc. And, of course, there's fertilizers and foods that come into that. So the only reason why imported chicken could be easier is because it would cut out a couple of those, going directly from the port to a DC and then to retailers.
I wonder then if the pains of the industry, the freight industry, are worse in certain regions of the country, or if it's an across-the-board problem, across-the-board pressure that you're feeling.
Well, across the board has had a fair amount of change, but definitely the N3, so that whole region around KZN, was very, very much affected. There have been a number of those who use that route primarily, have changed the route, and some of those have been exporters, importers from other countries. And then we've had one or two operations in South Africa, in our own country, who've decided not to use the Port of Durban anymore, to use the Port of Maputo, or find an alternative export point. So there is, in KZN, a far more urgent sense of getting this right. Around the country, there were one or two activities or one or two incidents, so it isn't plain sailing everywhere. All transporters are very nervous of what could happen on the road at any given time.
Gavin Kelly, fantastic to speak to you. Hopefully next time there'll be a lot more good news to discuss. Thank you very much for your time tonight, Gavin.